They laughed when she said, Sniper School Part 1, The Foundation. Fort Moore, Georgia, October 2023. 27 men waited for her to quit. They'd been placing bets since day one. Most gave her 3 days. The optimistic ones wagered a full week. None of them believed she'd see graduation. What they didn't know, at 14 years old, Captain Bryn Keller made a 940-yard shot on a coyote threatening her uncle's cattle, with a borrowed rifle. In crosswinds that would have made seasoned marksmen pack up and go home. She never mentioned it, didn't need to. Some truths don't require words, they require results. The whispers. 0400 hours. The barracks were dark except for the dim glow of emergency exit signs casting red shadows across rows of metal bunks. Captain Bryn Keller lay perfectly still under a rough wool blanket, her eyes open, staring at the springs of the bunk above her. The air smelled like gun oil and sweat, mixed with the faint scent of pine trees drifting through the cracked window. Outside, Georgia humidity pressed against the building like a wet towel, the kind of sticky heat that made you feel like you were breathing underwater. She could hear them in the hallway, 2 male voices just outside her door, talking in that half-whisper soldiers use when they think no one's listening. Give her 3 days, one said. His boots scraped against concrete as he shifted his weight. Maybe 1 week if she's stubborn. The second voice laughed, low and certain. Bet you $20 she quits before land nav. They always do. Bryn's hand moved to her dog tags. Fingers rubbed the embossed letters out of habit. It was the same motion she'd made as a kid on her uncle's ranch, touching spent shell casings in her pocket for luck before a long shot. Her jaw tightened, but her breathing stayed even and controlled. She'd heard this before. She'd heard worse. In her mind, another voice echoed. A friend from 2 years ago, sitting across from her in a college cafeteria, laughing at her dreams. You'll never make it in the Army, and there's no way you could become a sniper. Bryn blinked slowly in the darkness. Those words had burned themselves into her memory, and she'd carried them like ammunition ever since. She was 38 years old, 5'5" with calloused hands and sun-weathered skin that came from years working outdoors. She was a cavalry scout with the 1st Squadron, 91st Cavalry Regiment, part of the legendary 173rd Airborne Brigade, the Sky Soldiers, rapid response force for Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. She'd earned her airborne wings. She'd proven herself in the field. 2 deployments, Afghanistan, Africa, 7 years of service that had taken her from a ranch girl who enlisted late to a paratrooper operating in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. And now she was here at the Army Sniper School, one of only 2 women in a class of 28 soldiers. Her rifle sling hung on the post beside her bunk, adjusted exactly 3 notches from the end. Muscle memory from the ranch. Some habits you don't forget. Some habits become part of your DNA. But right now, in this moment, none of that mattered to the men outside her door. To them, she was dead weight, a diversity checkbox, a quota to fill, a political statement walking around in boots that would probably quit before the first week ended. They were waiting for her to fail, and she could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down harder than any rucksack ever had. Bryn closed her eyes, not to sleep, to remember. The mockery. 2 years earlier, Sierra Valley Community College, Northern California, a place where people went to restart their lives or finish what they'd started years before. Bryn sat at a cafeteria table with 3 friends, picking at a salad she wasn't really eating. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the room smelled like reheated pizza and industrial floor cleaner. The kind of institutional smell that made you feel like you were back in high school. She was 36 years old then, taking classes during a break between deployments. Most of her classmates were 18, 19, fresh out of high school, with their whole lives stretching ahead of them like an unopened highway. She felt ancient by comparison. But Vanessa Morrison was her age, pre-med, smart, driven, exhausted from trying to balance school with a part-time job and 2 kids at home. They bonded over being the old ladies in freshman composition class, the ones who actually did the reading and participated in discussions while teenagers scrolled through their phones. Bryn had just told them about her decision. After this deployment cycle ended, she was going for sniper school. Vanessa stopped mid-bite, eyes wide. Sniper school? She said it like Bryn had announced she was joining the circus. You? The other 2 friends went quiet, glancing at each other with those uncomfortable looks people get when they don't know what to say, but know they should say something. Vanessa kept going. I mean, come on, you're smart. You're actually making something of yourself. You could finish your degree, get a good job. Why would you throw that away? Bryn shrugged, keeping her voice calm. I want to serve at the highest level. I want to do something that matters. Something that uses every skill I have. But sniper school? Vanessa leaned back, shaking her head. And what? You think you're going to be some kind of elite soldier? Like with a rifle and ghillie suits and everything? Bryn met her eyes. Yes. The table went silent. Students at nearby tables glanced over, sensing the tension. Then Vanessa laughed. Not a polite chuckle. Not a supportive friend trying to lighten the mood. A full, mocking laugh that echoed across the cafeteria and made heads turn. There's no way you could become a sniper. That's insane. You'll never make it in that world. I'm sorry, but someone needs to be honest with you before you embarrass yourself. Bryn didn't argue, didn't defend herself, didn't try to explain the 1,000 hours she'd spent on the ranch perfecting her craft. She just nodded slowly, absorbing the words, filing them away in a place where doubt turned into fuel, where mockery became motivation, where every laugh became another reason to prove the laughers wrong. That night she called her uncle, told him about the conversation, about Vanessa's reaction, about the way the whole table had looked at her like she'd announced plans to climb Mount Everest in flip-flops. Uncle James Hartwell didn't laugh. He never did. His voice came through the phone, steady and certain. People who've never done hard things can't imagine other people doing them. Their limitations become their worldview. Don't let their small thinking make your world smaller, kiddo. You've been making impossible shots since you were 14 years old. This is just another target. 3 months later, Vanessa's number was blocked on her phone. Some people see obstacles. Bryn saw targets. The ranch. Bryn had grown up on ranches, first in Rockland, California, then Medford, Oregon, after her father died. Wide open spaces where the smell of sagebrush mixed with dust, and the only sounds for miles were wind through dry grass and the distant cry of hawks circling overhead. Where the sky stretched so big it made you feel small and infinite at the same time. Her father had been killed in a hunting accident when she was 10 years old, a careless hunter with poor muzzle discipline, a man who'd been drinking beer while handling a loaded rifle. A life ended in an instant because someone didn't respect the weapon in their hands. The hunter served 18 months in county jail, got out, went right back to hunting. Her father stayed dead. After that, she went to live with Uncle James. James Hartwell was 56 now, but back then he was a young Marine veteran, home from the Gulf War, trying to build a life on inherited land that didn't want to cooperate. He had tattoos on his forearms that told stories he rarely shared, and eyes that had seen things he never discussed. The kind of quiet strength that didn't need to announce itself. He taught Bryn to shoot when she was 12 years old, started with a .22 rifle that kicked less than a BB gun, taught her the fundamentals on tin cans at 50 yards, breathing, trigger control, the patience to wait for the perfect moment. Patience wins, he told her, his weathered hands guiding hers on the stock. Not speed, not strength, patience. The bullet doesn't care how tough you are. It doesn't care how badly you want to hit the target. It cares about wind, distance, and whether you can hold still long enough to let physics do its work. By the time she was 14, she was hunting coyotes with a .308 Winchester, protecting the cattle from predators that came down from the hills. Smart predators that learned the patterns of the ranch and adapted. The kind that required real skill to outsmart. She learned to track before she learned to drive. Learned to stay motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect shot. Learned to read the land like a book written in scat and hoof prints and broken branches. While other teenage girls were learning makeup and navigating social drama she never understood, Bryn was learning to read wind through mirage patterns and vegetation movement. Learning that a slight shifting grass direction meant wind was changing, that temperature inversions at dawn affected bullet trajectory, that patience and observation mattered more than expensive equipment. Her high school friends noticed something about her early on. She could find things. Lost car keys buried in couch cushions. A specific tool in a cluttered garage with 50 other tools. A face in a crowded room of hundreds. It was like her brain processed visual information differently, scanning and cataloging and identifying details most people's eyes passed right over. They started calling her Hawkeye. At the time, it was just a nickname, a joke among friends who thought it was cool that the quiet ranch girl could spot things they couldn't. Nobody imagined that years later, that joke would become her call sign. That the girl who could find lost keys in tall grass would become the woman who could spot an enemy combatant at 800 meters in partial concealment. But Uncle James knew. When she told him at age 30 about enlisting, about her goals, about wanting to eventually attend sniper school, he just nodded with that slight smile he got when he knew something others didn't. You've been training for this your whole life, kid. You just didn't know it yet. The Army will teach you their way. That's good. You need to learn their way. But you're bringing something they can't teach. Something that takes decades to develop. What's that? Patience. Real patience. Not the kind you learn in a classroom. The kind that comes from watching a coyote for 3 hours, waiting for the wind to settle. The shot that changed everything. She was 14 years old. Late summer, 1999. Oregon hills baking under an August sun that turned the grass gold and made the air shimmer. The coyote had been killing calves for 3 weeks straight. Uncle James had tried everything. Leg-hold traps that the animal avoided. Electronic calls that it ignored. Night watches with thermal optics that revealed nothing but raccoons and possums. The animal was smart, too smart. It hunted at dawn when the light was tricky and human attention was low. It struck fast, killing with precision, then disappeared into the mountain timber before anyone could respond. It never used the same approach twice. They were going to lose more cattle if something didn't change. Each calf represented months of investment, feed, veterinary care, future breeding stock. The ranch operated on thin margins. This coyote was costing them money they didn't have. That morning, Uncle James woke Bryn at 0430 hours. Didn't say much, just handed her his .308 Winchester and a box of federal ammunition. The rifle was older than she was, a Remington 700 with a worn stock and scope that had seen 20 years of hunting seasons. But it was zeroed perfectly, and Uncle James maintained it like a surgeon maintains his instruments. They drove out to the eastern pasture in his old Ford pickup, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like knives through black velvet. "Coyote's been hitting this section," he said quietly. His voice always got quieter when he was hunting, like he was already slipping into that mindset where every sound mattered. "Patterns suggest it comes down from that ridge line." He pointed to a hill that looked impossibly far away, barely visible in the gray light before dawn. "If we're lucky, it'll show itself at first light. If we're not, we wait for tomorrow." They set up in a shallow depression that gave them concealment and a clear line of sight across the valley. Uncle James had his spotting scope on a small tripod. Bryn had the rifle on a bipod, the kind Uncle James had fabricated from scrap metal in his workshop. The sky shifted from black to deep blue to pale orange, colors bleeding into each other like watercolors on wet paper. 0612 hours. The coyote appeared, a gray shape moving along the ridgeline, nose to the ground hunting for scent trails, moving with that careful efficiency predators have, every movement purposeful, no wasted energy. Range, Uncle James said quietly, eye pressed to the spotting scope. Bryn looked through the rifle scope, found the animal in her field of view. Her heart was pounding, but her hands were steady. Uncle James had taught her that your heart could race all it wanted as long as your hands stayed calm. 940 yards, Uncle James said after a moment of calculation. Maybe 950. Winds running about 18 miles per hour, left to right. See how the grass is bending? She did. Could see the wave pattern moving across the valley like an invisible hand stroking the earth. He paused. That's too far, kiddo. Way too far. We'll wait for it to come closer. It usually works down this way. But Bryn was already doing the math in her head. Numbers her uncle had drilled into her over thousands of practice sessions. Numbers that had become instinct. Wind deflection at that range with this ammunition, roughly 3 feet. Bullet drop, significant. The way morning air behaves differently than afternoon air. Denser, more consistent, actually better for long shots despite the tricky light. She adjusted the scope, felt the wind on her left cheek, watched how the grass bent between her position and the target, saw the pattern, saw the rhythm. I can make the shot, she said. Uncle James looked at her, really looked at her. Bryn, that's almost 1,000 yards. That's professional distance. That's the kind of shot I made maybe twice in the Marines with equipment you don't have and training you haven't had. She didn't argue, didn't try to convince him with words, just settled deeper into her prone position, controlled her breathing, slowed her heartbeat using the technique he taught her. Slow breath in, pause. Slow breath out, pause. Let the world settle. The coyote stopped moving, stood broadside on the ridgeline. Perfect presentation, like it was posing for a photograph. Time seemed to slow down, the kind of time dilation that happens in moments of absolute focus. She could hear Uncle James breathing beside her, could smell the sage in morning dew, could feel the earth solid beneath her body, could sense the wind patterns shifting like living things. The crosshairs settled on a point in space where geometry and instinct told her the bullet and target would meet. Not where the coyote was now, but where it would be. Accounting for distance, for wind, for bullet drop, for all the invisible forces that affect a projectile traveling nearly 1,000 yards. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle bucked against her shoulder. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder, echoing off the hills. Through the scope, she watched the coyote drop instantly. No twitch, no run. Just dropped like someone had cut its strings. Clean kill. Uncle James was silent for a long moment, eyes still pressed to the spotting scope. When he finally sat back and looked at her, his expression was something she'd never seen before. Not quite shock, not quite pride. Something deeper. He struggled for words. That's a professional level shot. Bryn, do you understand what you just did? That's a shot that trained snipers practice for years to make. That's a shot that most hunters would never attempt because the odds of wounding instead of killing are too high. She ejected the spent casing, caught it out of habit. The brass was still warm in her palm. I felt where the bullet needed to go, she said simply. I don't know how to explain it better than that. I just knew, like I could see the path before I pulled the trigger. Uncle James nodded slowly, processing. Some people spend their whole lives trying to develop that kind of instinct. They practice 10,000 shots and never get it. You just have it, natural, like you were born seeing things others can't see. He put his hand on her shoulder. Your daddy would have been proud. So proud it would have made him cry. And I'm proud. But kiddo, you need to understand something important. What you just did isn't normal. That's a gift, a real gift. And gifts like that come with responsibility. You don't waste gifts. You don't hide them. You develop them and use them for something that matters. From that day forward, she never missed, not once. Coyotes stalking the herd, bobcats getting too close to the chicken coops, the occasional mountain lion that wandered down from the high country. Hundreds of shots over the next few years, hundreds of hits, different distances, different conditions, different angles. Uncle James started keeping a detailed journal. Date, time, distance, weather conditions, result. Documentation of something he knew was special, even if he couldn't fully explain it. He told her once that he was keeping the journal so that when she was older, when she'd done something important with this gift, she'd have proof of where it started. The .308 Winchester became hers. He gave it to her on her 16th birthday with a simple inscription burned into the stock with a wood-burning tool. Patience wins, J.H. She kept it in her truck through high school, through the years of ranch work that followed, through all the time she spent trying to figure out what she was supposed to do with her life, while her high school friends went to college or got married or moved to cities. And when she finally enlisted at age 30, Uncle James drove her to the recruiting station with that rifle in the gun rack behind her head. "The Army's going to teach you their way," he said as they sat in the parking lot. "That's good. You need to learn their way. Discipline, teamwork, military protocols. But don't forget what you already know. Don't let them train the instinct out of you. Sometimes the old ways and the new ways meet in the middle, and that's where excellence lives." She understood now, lying in this dark barracks at Fort Moore, listening to men bet on her failure. Uncle James had been preparing her for this moment since she was 12 years old. Not just to shoot. Anyone can learn to shoot. The Army taught thousands of people to shoot every year. He'd been teaching her to endure, to outlast, to let her work speak when her words couldn't, to carry doubt like ammunition and use it as fuel, to understand that the only opinion that mattered was the target's, and targets don't have opinions. The beginning. Fort Moore, Georgia, October 2023, Day 1. The formation assembled at 0600 hours on a concrete pad behind the sniper school headquarters building. 28 soldiers in PT uniforms, standing at attention in 4 ranks of 7. Bryn stood in the back row, far right, tallest to shortest, which put her exactly where she expected to be. The morning air was already thick with humidity, that Georgia moisture that made your uniform stick to your skin before the sun even cleared the horizon. The other woman in the class, Private Emma Sullivan, stood 3 soldiers to her left, 22 years old, blonde, eager-eyed. She'd introduced herself in the barracks the night before with nervous energy that radiated off her like heat. "I'm so glad there's another woman here," Emma had said, her voice too loud for the quiet barracks. "We can support each other, right? Like a team." Bryn had nodded politely but kept her distance. She'd learned long ago that in environments like this, association could be a liability. If Emma failed, people would lump them together. 2 women, both failures. Proof that the concept didn't work. Better to let performance speak individually. Better to succeed or fail on her own merit. The morning air was already thick with humidity. Georgia in October still felt like summer to anyone who didn't grow up in the South. Bryn could feel sweat starting under her PT shirt. It was going to be a long day. Master Sergeant Cole Brennan walked out of the building and stood before the formation. 48 years old, Gulf War veteran, 22 years in the Army, the last 12 running this course. He had the weathered look of a man who'd spent his entire adult life in the sun and the field. The kind of face that had seen everything and was impressed by nothing. His voice carried without needing to shout. "Good morning. I'm Master Sergeant Brennan. For the next 29 days, I am your primary instructor. You will address me as Sergeant. You will follow instructions precisely. You will meet standards that do not bend, do not negotiate, and do not care about your feelings." He paused, scanning the formation with eyes that seemed to evaluate each soldier individually in that brief moment. This course has a 60% attrition rate. That means if history holds, fewer than 12 of you will graduate. Most of you will fail. That is not a threat. That is a statistical fact based on 12 years of data. Another pause. Some of you are Ranger qualified. Some have combat deployments. Some have college degrees and high PT scores. None of that matters here. The only thing that matters is whether you can meet the standard every day for 29 days straight without exception. His eyes moved across the formation and stopped on Bryn for just a moment, long enough for her to notice, long enough for her to know he'd noticed her, then continued scanning. Standards don't bend for age. They don't bend for rank. They don't bend for anything else either. Gender doesn't get you special treatment. It doesn't get you lowered expectations. Performance is performance. You either meet the mark or you go home. That's the only equation that matters here. Behind Brennan, another instructor emerged from the building. Staff Sergeant Garrett Monroe, mid-30s, lean, with a Ranger tab on his left shoulder, and the kind of eyes that missed nothing. The kind of instructor who evaluated you constantly, cataloging strengths and weaknesses for future exploitation. Monroe positioned himself at the corner of the formation, arms crossed, watching. Today is day 1, Brennan continued. PT test, 12-mile ruck march, 50 pounds of gear, you have 4 hours. Anyone who falls out fails and goes home immediately. No second chances. No medical excuses unless you're actively dying. Questions? Silence. Outstanding. Draw your rucks from supply. Formation in 30 minutes. Dismissed. The formation broke. Soldiers moved toward the supply building with purpose, but not panic. Everyone here had done ruck marches before. This was standard infantry stuff. Nothing exotic. But Bryn knew better. Nothing in sniper school was standard. They weren't testing whether you could carry weight. Any infantrymen could carry weight. They were testing whether you could carry weight and still have enough left in the tank to focus, to think, to perform precision tasks under exhaustion. They were testing your baseline, establishing who would be worth the investment of time. She collected her ruck from supply, checked the weight on the scale, 52 pounds. Close enough to 50 that nobody would complain. Standard Army, Alice Pack, sleeping system, MREs, water, and the M24 sniper weapon system that would be their primary tool for the next month. The M24. The rifle felt good in her hands. 11.88 pounds of steel and composite. Bolt action. Remington 700 receiver. A weapon system older than some of the soldiers in this class, but still one of the most reliable precision rifles ever made. There was a reason the Army had been using variants of this platform since the 1980s. She did a functions check. Smooth bolt movement, clean barrel, solid stock, everything where it should be. Muscle memory took over as she loaded the ruck. Weight distribution mattered. Too high and it would pull on your shoulders. Too low and it would drag on your hips. The center of gravity had to align with your body's center of gravity. Every pound had to balance. She thought of Uncle James teaching her to pack a hunting ruck when she was 15. Same principles, different application. The weight of knowledge transferred across contexts. 30 minutes later, they formed up again, this time with full gear. The Georgia sun was climbing, temperature already in the low 80s. It would be in the 90s by noon, the kind of heat that made you question your life choices. Bryn adjusted her pack straps, settled the weight on her hips, and fell into formation. She could feel eyes on her, quick glances from male soldiers sizing her up, calculating, judging, wondering how long she'd last. Let them look, let them wonder. In 4 hours, they'd have their first answer. The first test. Monroe led the formation out at 6:30. No music, no cadence calls, just the sound of boots on pavement transitioning to boots on dirt trail, the rhythmic crunch of gravel under feet, the creaking of pack straps under load. The route wound through Fort Moore's training areas, hills that didn't look like much on paper but became mountains after the first hour with weight on your back. Georgia, red clay trails that turned slippery when wet and dusty when dry. Bryn settled into a rhythm. Step, breathe, Step, breathe. The pack dug into her shoulders despite proper adjustment. That was normal. That was expected. Pain was just information. It told you something was happening. It didn't tell you to quit. She could hear Uncle James's voice from 1,000 training sessions. Pain is just data, kid. It tells you your body is working. It tells you muscles are being used. It doesn't tell you to stop. You tell you to stop. And you're not going to tell you to stop. The formation spread out naturally. Faster soldiers pulled ahead. Slower ones fell back. The column stretched from a tight formation into a long line of individuals. Bryn positioned herself in the middle third, not trying to impress anyone, not trying to prove anything, just maintaining a steady pace that she knew she could hold for hours. The pace Uncle James had taught her on long hunting treks in the Oregon mountains. Around her, she could hear breathing getting heavier, soldiers adjusting their packs, the occasional grunt when someone's foot caught a root or rock, the metallic clink of rifles against pack frames. At the 2-hour mark, Monroe called a 5-minute rest. Soldiers dropped their packs and sprawled in the dirt. Some drank water. Others just lay there, sucking air, staring at the sky. Bryn stayed on her feet, loosened her shoulder straps slightly, but didn't remove the pack, sipped water, controlled her breathing. Staying vertical kept the muscles engaged, made it easier to start moving again. She noticed Emma Sullivan sitting against a tree, hands shaking slightly as she drank. The younger woman's face was flushed red, not pink, red. She was struggling already, and they weren't even halfway done. Monroe walked through the group, observing, making mental notes. His eyes cataloged everything. Who was struggling? Who was fine? Who was faking fine? He stopped near Bryn. "Doing all right, Captain?" His tone was neutral, not friendly, not hostile, just collecting data. "Yes, Sergeant." He nodded once and kept moving. The march resumed. The next 2 hours were harder. Feet were blistering. Shoulders were screaming. The weight that had seemed manageable at the start now felt like it had doubled. At the 4-hour mark, they crossed the finish line back at the training area. Bryn checked her watch. 3 hours and 32 minutes, middle of the pack, exactly where she needed to be. Not so fast that she stood out, not so slow that she looked weak. 15 soldiers finished ahead of her, 11 behind. One didn't finish at all, dropping out at mile 9 with severe blisters that had rubbed his heels raw and bloody. 27 remaining. Emma Sullivan finished dead last at 3 hours and 58 minutes, 2 minutes before the cutoff. Her legs were shaking. Her face was pale. She looked like she might vomit, but she finished. That counted for something. That night in the barracks, Bryn could hear other soldiers in the common area, talking, comparing times, building camaraderie, the sound of men bonding over shared suffering. She stayed in her room, cleaned her rifle with CLP solvent and a boar snake. The smell was familiar, comforting. Gun oil and metal, the smell of purpose. The repetitive motion of running the cleaning rod through the barrel was almost meditative. Zen and the art of rifle maintenance. Her feet were screaming, blisters forming on both heels, hot spots on her toes where the boots had rubbed despite proper fit and good socks. She didn't ice them, didn't want anyone to see her treating injuries. Weakness was contagious in environments like this. One person limping led to everyone wondering if they should be limping too. Instead, she just cleaned her weapon, checked her gear for tomorrow, and went to bed early. Through the thin walls, she could hear voices. "Emma barely made it. She'll be gone by week 2. What about the other one? Keller?" Hard to say. She's older, experienced, but this course breaks everyone eventually. The ones who look strong at the start sometimes fall apart when the pressure builds. She didn't look like she was even trying. Finished middle of the pack like it was a Sunday stroll. That could be good or bad. Either she's pacing herself smart, or she's already at her limit in faking it. Bryn lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. The springs above her creaked slightly whenever the soldier in the top bunk shifted position. Let them talk. Let them speculate. Let them create whatever narrative they needed. Tomorrow was day 2. Classroom instruction. Ballistics in atmospheric conditions. Mathematics and physics. The physical test was over. Now came the mental game. And that, Bryn knew, was where most people failed. Not because they couldn't understand the concepts, but because they couldn't apply them under pressure. Couldn't turn theory into practice when everything was on the line and instructors were watching and fellow students were judging. She thought about the 940-yard coyote shot. 14 years old. No formal training in ballistics. Just instinct and Uncle James's patient coaching. What she'd done then through feel, she would now learn to do through science. The old way and the new way, meeting in the middle, where excellence lives. She closed her eyes. Sleep came quickly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new tests, new opportunities to prove that patience, skill, and determination had no gender. But tonight she'd completed day 1, 28 days to go. Part 2, the crucible, the classroom. Day 2 began at 0530 hours with PT, standard Army stuff, push-ups, sit-ups, pull-ups, a 3-mile run. Nothing extraordinary, just maintenance of baseline fitness. Bryn moved through it mechanically. Her body knew these rhythms. 7 years of military service had ingrained them deep into muscle memory. At 0800 hours, the class assembled in a classroom building that smelled like old coffee and whiteboard markers. The institutional smell of military education. Desks arranged in rows, each with a notepad and mechanical pencil. A large whiteboard dominated the front wall, already covered with diagrams and formulas that looked like they'd been left over from the previous class. Master Sergeant Brennan stood at the front, eraser in hand. "Today we begin the real work," he said, wiping the old formulas away. "Anyone can carry a ruck. Anyone can pass basic marksmanship. What separates a sniper from a regular soldier is the ability to make precise shots at extended range under varied conditions. That requires understanding physics." He tapped the whiteboard where a trajectory diagram was drawn, a simple arc showing a bullet's path from muzzle to target. Ballistics is not guesswork. It is mathematics. Wind speed and direction, atmospheric pressure, temperature, humidity, altitude, Coriolis effect from the Earth's rotation. All of these factors affect your bullet's flight path. Miss any one of them, and you miss your target. Hit your target when you should have missed, and you got lucky. Luck doesn't graduate from this course. Knowledge graduates from this course. For the next 3 hours, Brennan walked them through the fundamentals. How air density changes with altitude and temperature. How a bullet that shoots flat at sea level will shoot high at 5,000 feet because there's less air resistance. How wind at the shooter's position might be completely different from wind at the target 200 yards downrange. How the Earth's rotation affects bullet trajectory at extreme distances, pushing rounds to the right in the northern hemisphere and to the left in the southern hemisphere. Bryn took notes but found herself already understanding most of it. Not from formal training, but from years of practical application. Uncle James had taught her these principles without using fancy terms. He just called it reading the air. Said that good shooters learn to feel what the bullet would do before it left the barrel. At 1100 hours, Brennan called on students randomly to solve problems on the board. Specialist Vaughn, 800-yard shot, 15-mile-per-hour crosswind from 10 o'clock. Standard atmospheric pressure at 3,000 feet elevation. Calculate your mill adjustment. Tucker Vaughn stood, 28 years old, infantry background, cocky energy that came from guys who'd been told they were good their whole military career. He approached the board, worked through the math, wrote down his answer. 3.1 mils elevation, 1.6 mils left windage, Sergeant. Brennan nodded. Close. You got the elevation right, but you forgot to account for the Coriolis effect at that range and elevation. In the northern hemisphere, it'll push you around slightly right, which partially cancels the left windage from the wind. What's your corrected windage? Vaughn hesitated, doing mental math that should have been done the first time. 1.4 mils left? 1.3. The Coriolis effect at 800 yards is roughly 0.2 mils at this latitude. Small, but enough to matter. Remember, at these distances, everything matters. Sit down. Brennan's eyes scanned the room and landed on Bryn. Captain Keller, same scenario but change the elevation to 3,800 feet and the wind direction to 10 o'clock instead of 9 o'clock. Give me your adjustment. Bryn stood, walked to the board. She could feel every eye in the room on her. The weight of expectation, the hope that she'd fail, the curiosity about whether she actually knew what she was doing. The math wasn't complicated if you knew the principles. Higher elevation meant thinner air, which meant less drag on the bullet, which meant it would shoot flatter and require less elevation adjustment. Wind from 10 o'clock instead of 9 meant it was coming from forward left instead of directly left, which changed the deflection angle because you had to account for the wind's vector relative to the bullet's flight path. She worked through it quickly, writing out each step, not to show off, but to demonstrate her process. In environments like this, showing your work mattered as much as getting the right answer, maybe more. 3.2 mils elevation, 1.4 mils right windage, Sergeant. Brennan studied the board. Long pause. She could hear someone shifting in their seat behind her. Correct. But explain your windage calculation. Why right instead of left with a wind from 10 o'clock? This was the test. Not just can you calculate, but do you understand why? Can you explain it? Can you teach it? Wind from 10 o'clock is coming from forward left, Bryn said, her voice steady. That creates a component that pushes the bullet right as it travels downrange. Combined with Coriolis drift in the northern hemisphere, which also pushes right, the total deflection is right instead of left. The specific value of 1.4 mils accounts for wind speed, bullet velocity, and time of flight at 800 yards. Brennan nodded slowly. Outstanding. That's exactly the kind of thinking that makes a sniper. Understanding the why, not just the what. Sit down. As she returned to her seat, she heard a whisper from behind her. Tucker Vaughn's voice, just loud enough for nearby students to hear, but quiet enough to pretend it wasn't meant to be heard. Bet her boyfriend coached her last night, probably some ranger instructor giving her the answers. She didn't react, didn't turn around, just sat down and continued taking notes, as if she hadn't heard anything. But her hand tightened on her pen. Knuckles went white for just a moment before she consciously forced them to relax. Let him think what he wants. The board doesn't lie. The math doesn't care who taught her. The target certainly won't care when it's time to shoot. Results speak louder than insults. After class, Staff Sergeant Monroe approached her outside the building as students filed toward the barracks for lunch. Walk with me, Captain. They moved away from the other students, toward the tree line at the edge of the compound. The Georgia pines stood tall and straight, their needles carpeting the ground beneath them. Monroe didn't speak immediately, just walked. Bryn stayed silent, waiting. She'd learned in the military that when a senior NCO said, "Walk with me," you walked and you waited for them to talk when they were ready. Finally, he said, "I pulled your file yesterday, all of it." "Yes, Sergeant." "Says you enlisted at age 30, older than most recruits, cavalry scout, 7 years active duty, 2 deployments, Afghanistan and Africa. Solid performance reviews across the board, but nothing that screams sniper material on paper. No advanced marksmanship courses, no competition shooting, just standard qualification scores." He paused, kicking at a pine cone on the trail. "But then I made a phone call to your old platoon sergeant in the 173rd, Staff Sergeant Martinez. You remember him?" "Yes, Sergeant. He told me something interesting. Said you were the best natural observer he'd ever seen in 20 years of military service. Said you could spot targets other scouts would miss. Said you had an instinct for reading terrain that usually takes 10 years to develop. Said you volunteered for every patrol, every mission, every hard job that came up. Monroe stopped walking and turned to face her. Where did you really learn to shoot, Captain? Bryn met his eyes. My uncle, Sergeant, ranch work, predator control, started when I was 12 years old. Hunting? Hunting. Target practice, protecting livestock from coyotes and bobcats, whatever was needed. Monroe nodded slowly, processing. That explains the fundamentals, the stability, the patience. You've been doing this longer than most of these soldiers have been in the Army, longer than some of them have been alive. He crossed his arms. But here's what I'm wondering. Why now? Why sniper school at age 38? You could have applied years ago, could have gone through selection in your 20s when the physical demands were easier. Why wait until now? It was a fair question, one she'd asked herself many times over the years. Because I wasn't ready, Sergeant. I had the physical skills, but not the mental maturity, not the discipline, not the understanding of why the military does things the way it does. The Army taught me how to be a soldier, taught me about teamwork, about following orders, about being part of something bigger than myself. Now I'm ready to learn how to be a sniper, to take those individual skills and put them in service of the mission. Monroe studied her face for a long moment, looking for something. Doubt, maybe, or arrogance, or whatever quality he'd seen in students who eventually failed. You know what's going to happen, right? Every time you succeed, some of these men are going to find a reason to discredit it. Luck, favorable conditions, help from instructors. Every time you fail, even a little, they'll use it as proof that women don't belong here. You're not just trying to pass this course, you're carrying the weight of every woman who'll come after you. Every future female soldier who wants to try this school will be judged partly on what you do here. I know, Sergeant. That's a heavy ruck, heavier than the 50 pounds you carried this morning. Yes, Sergeant, but I've carried heavier, and I'll carry this one the same way I carry everything else, one step at a time until the job is done. Monroe's expression shifted slightly, not quite a smile, but something close to respect. The kind of look senior NCOs give when they recognize a certain quality in a soldier. Carry on, Captain, and remember, Master Sergeant Brennan and I don't care what anyone thinks. We only care what the targets say. And targets don't lie. They don't have opinions. They don't have biases. They either fall or they don't. That's the only metric that matters here. He walked away, leaving Bryn standing at the edge of the tree line. She looked out at the Georgia pines, breathing in the scent of sun-warmed needles in red clay, the smell of the South. Targets don't lie. She'd been hitting targets since she was 12 years old. Hundreds of them. Maybe thousands if you counted all the practice sessions with Uncle James. Tin cans and paper targets and steel gongs and living coyotes that were smart enough to make it challenging. The targets at this course would be no different. They were just targets, distance and wind and mathematics. All she had to do was what she'd always done. Be patient, read the conditions, and let the bullet do its work. Everything else was just noise. The breaking point. Day 5 arrived with overcast skies and humidity so thick you could drink it. Land Navigation Day. The test that separated those who could read maps and terrain from those who merely thought they could. Each student received a topographic map marked with 5 points. They had 6 hours to locate all 5 points in sequence, using only map and compass. No GPS, no cell phones, no asking for directions. Just orienteering fundamentals that the Army had been teaching since before satellites existed. Emma Sullivan drew her map at 600 hours, studied it for 10 minutes with furrowed brow, and stepped off into the woods at 6:20. Bryn watched her go, saw the uncertainty in the younger woman's movements, the way she kept checking and rechecking her compass, the hesitation before choosing a direction. The body language of someone who wasn't confident but was trying really hard to fake it. Bryn drew her own map 20 minutes later, studied the terrain features, ridge lines and saddles, water sources and road networks, identified the elevation changes, the obvious landmarks, the terrain traps where people typically got lost. Plotted her route not for speed, but for certainty. Sometimes the longer route was actually faster if it meant you didn't get lost. In the woods, time moved differently. No sounds of civilization except the distant rumble of artillery from another training area. Just boots on leaves, breathing, and the occasional call of birds overhead. The forest had its own rhythms if you knew how to listen. She found her first point in 40 minutes. A small red flag tied to a tree at a trail junction. She marked her card with the code written on the flag and continued to point 2. The second point was harder. Required crossing a creek and climbing a steep hillside covered in loose shale that shifted under her boots. But she'd grown up in terrain like this. Oregon hills, California ranges. Her body knew how to move through forests without fighting it, knew which trees had roots stable enough to grab, knew how to read slope and choose the path of least resistance. Point 2. Point 3. Point 4. She was making good time. 3 hours elapsed and she had 4 points confirmed. 1 more to go and she'd be back with time to spare. Point 5 should have been straightforward according to the map. A clearing on a ridgeline, 500 meters from point 4 on an azimuth of 45 degrees. But when she reached the coordinates, there was no flag, no clearing, just dense forest that didn't match the map's representation. She stopped, pulled out her map and compass, reshot her azimuth, checked her pace count, verified her elevation using terrain features. The math said she was in the right place. The terrain said otherwise. She'd learned from Uncle James that sometimes maps lie, not intentionally, but because terrain changes. Trees grow, clearings fill in, streams change course. What was accurate 5 years ago when the map was printed might not be accurate today. Maps are snapshots, he'd told her. The land is a movie. Sometimes you have to adjust for the difference. She expanded her search pattern, moved in a systematic grid, checking every tree within a 100-meter radius. Methodical, patient, the way Uncle James had taught her to search for wounded game that had run after being shot. Found the flag 15 minutes later, attached to a tree at the edge of what used to be a clearing, but was now young forest. Pine saplings 6 feet tall, where there had probably been open ground when the map was made. She marked her card and headed back to the start point, finished with 20 minutes to spare. Back at the assembly area, about half the class had already returned. Soldiers sat in the grass, drinking water, checking their cards against each other, building camaraderie through shared experience. Tucker Vaughn was there, Dawson Reed, several others. But Emma Sullivan wasn't. An hour passed. More students trickled in. Some had found all 5 points. Some had found only 3 or 4 and would receive partial credit. One student had gotten completely turned around and found none of the points, just wandered in circles for 3 hours before finally giving up and following a road back. Still no Emma. At the 4-hour mark, Bryn began to worry. Land navigation wasn't dangerous in the traditional sense. There were no cliffs, no quicksand, no predators larger than raccoons. But it was easy to get turned around, to lose confidence in your navigation and start second-guessing every decision, to panic and make things worse. Monroe stood near the assembly area, radio in hand, monitoring. At 5 hours, he keyed his radio. "All stations, this is control. We have 1 student unaccounted for. Initiate search protocol." Instructors fanned out into the woods, some following likely routes, others checking known problem areas where students typically got confused, areas where terrain features looked similar and it was easy to mistake one ridge for another. They found Emma at hour 6. One of the instructors guided her out of a ravine 3 kilometers off course. She was muddy, exhausted, and holding back tears that streaked the dirt on her face. She'd found only 2 of the 5 points, failed the evolution. Master Sergeant Brennan met her at the assembly area. His voice was firm, but not unkind. The voice of a man who'd delivered this news before and would deliver it again. "Private Sullivan, you failed to complete the land navigation course within the time limit. Per the standards of this school, That constitutes a course failure. You will be dropped from training and returned to your unit. Do you understand? Emma nodded. Her voice was barely a whisper. Yes, Sergeant. You served honorably and gave your best effort. That's all anyone can ask. There's no shame in attempting something difficult. Most soldiers never have the courage to try. Pack your gear. Transportation leaves in 2 hours. Emma looked around the assembly area. Her eyes found Bryn. For a moment, their gazes locked. Bryn saw the disappointment there, the sense of failure, the fear that she'd let down every woman who might come after her. After the formation dismissed, Bryn found Emma in the barracks, packing her duffel with mechanical movements. The kind of movements people make when they're trying not to think too hard about what they're doing. Emma, the younger woman, looked up. Her eyes were red but dry. She'd cried earlier but was holding it together now through sheer force of will. I'm sorry, Emma said, her voice breaking slightly. I should have been better prepared, should have practiced more, should have studied the map better. I let you down. I let every woman down. Bryn shook her head. You didn't let anyone down. This course is designed to fail most people. It has a 60% attrition rate. That's not a reflection on you. That's just the reality of the standard they've set. But you're going to make it, I can tell. You're strong and skilled and you know what you're doing. And when you do, you'll be the only woman. All that pressure, I'll handle it. But Emma, listen to me. You served with honor. You volunteered for one of the hardest courses the Army offers. You pushed yourself to your absolute limit. Most soldiers never have the courage to even try. The fact that you were here, that you attempted this, that you gave everything you had, that matters. That means something. Emma nodded slowly. What made you different? What do you have that I don't? I need to know. It was a fair question, one Bryn had considered many times while watching Emma struggle. Time, she finally said. I've been doing this for 26 years. Since I was 12 years old. You've been in the Army 2 years. That's not a character flaw. That's not weakness. That's just reality. Some skills require decades to develop. You can't shortcut experience. You can't rush mastery. Will you make it? I don't know, but I'm going to try. And if I do, I'll remember that you tried first, that you paved some of the way. That takes courage I respect. Emma shouldered her duffel, extended her hand. Make them respect us. Show them what we can do. Bryn shook it. I'll do my best. She watched Emma walk out of the barracks, watched a van carry her away from Fort Moore, back to her regular unit, back to a military career that would continue, but would always carry the weight of this failure somewhere in her service record. And Bryn felt the pressure settle more heavily on her shoulders. She wasn't just trying to pass for herself anymore. She was carrying the hopes of every woman who might attempt this course in the future. If she failed now, it would be years before another woman got the opportunity. The Army would look at Emma's failure and her failure and conclude, consciously or unconsciously, that women simply couldn't meet the standard, that the experiment had been tried and had failed. But if she succeeded, she'd open a door that had been closed for generations. That night, the male students in the common area talked more freely. Without Emma there, they seemed to feel less constrained. I knew she wouldn't make it. Nice girl, but this course isn't for nice girls. What about Keller? She's different, older, more experience. But Land Nav was just the warm-up. Wait until we get to stalking. Wait until we're doing unknown distance shoots in bad weather. She'll break eventually. They all do. My money's on week 3. That's when the real pressure starts. Bryn lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling, and thought about the 940-yard coyote shot. 14 years old, crosswinds that would make grown men pack up their rifles and go home. A distance that Uncle James said was too far, that trained Marines would hesitate to attempt. She'd made that shot because she hadn't been thinking about proving anything. She'd been thinking about protecting the cattle, about doing what needed to be done, about solving a problem that needed solving. The same mindset applied here. Don't think about proving women belong. Don't think about carrying the weight of future generations. Don't think about the doubters or the whispers or the bets against you. Just do the work, hit the targets, complete the tasks. Everything else was noise. The Suit of Shadows. Week 2 began with ghillie suit construction. The classroom had been transformed overnight. Tables covered with jute material in various earth tones, netting, burlap, spools of thread, needles, wire. On the walls hung photographs of properly constructed ghillie suits, the camouflage so effective that in the photos, soldiers were nearly invisible against their backgrounds. You had to stare at the images for several seconds before your brain could pick out the human shapes. Master Sergeant Brennan stood at the front, holding up a completed suit. It looked like something between a costume and a creature, covered in strips of material that broke up the human outline completely. A sniper's greatest weapon is not the rifle, he said, turning the suit slowly so everyone could see it from all angles. It's invisibility. A properly constructed ghillie suit allows you to become part of the terrain, not hidden behind it, but part of it. The difference is subtle but critical. Hidden means you're still separate from the environment. Part of it means you become indistinguishable from it. He laid the suit across a table. You will construct your suits from the materials provided. You will use local vegetation to customize them for Georgia terrain. Pine needles, grass, whatever breaks up your silhouette against the background you'll be working in. This is an art as much as a science. Pay attention to detail. Rushed work will get you spotted. Spotted snipers are dead snipers. The students spread out to their workstations. Bryn found herself at a table near the window, natural light streaming in and casting shadows across the materials. She picked up the base netting, felt the weight and texture, started planning her approach. This wasn't random. This required thought. This wasn't new to her. Uncle James had taught her to build hunting blinds when she was 15. Different materials, same principles. You weren't trying to become invisible in an absolute sense. You were trying to break up the pattern that human brains instinctively recognize as human. The bilateral symmetry, the vertical lines, the movement patterns. She began stitching jute strips to the netting in irregular patterns. Not symmetrical. Nature doesn't do symmetry. Random lengths, random spacing, building up layers that would create depth and shadow when light hit it from different angles. Her hands moved with practiced confidence, stitching from ranch work, to pairs on tarps and tents and gear that broke in the field. The kind of practical skills that civilian life had taught her long before the Army entered the picture. Across the table, Dawson Reed watched her work. 29 years old, North Carolina native, friendly disposition. He'd been one of the few soldiers who treated her with consistent professional courtesy from day one. "You've done this before," he observed, "something similar. Hunting blinds for mule deer in Oregon." "Where in Oregon?" "Hills outside Medford, Cascade Range, high desert terrain." "What kind of hunting needs this level of camouflage?" She looked up from her stitching, needle paused mid-pull. "The kind where the deer has better eyes than you do, where if it spots you once, it disappears into the mountains and you never see it again. Mule deer can spot movement at 300 yards. They don't see color the way we do, but they see patterns and movement better than any human." Reed nodded thoughtfully. "My uncle hunted whitetail in North Carolina, said the same thing. Said deer don't see like people. They see movement. They see patterns that don't belong. Said you could wear bright orange and they wouldn't care as long as you stayed still." Your uncle was right. It's all about breaking up the human pattern. 3 tables over, Tucker Vaughn was struggling with his suit. His stitching was uneven, creating bunches in the netting that would show as obvious lumps in the field. Lumps that would cast shadows. Shadows that would look wrong to trained observers. He yanked at the thread in frustration. Staff Sergeant Monroe appeared behind him like a ghost. "Stop. You're forcing it. Smooth stitches. Even tension. That bunch right there will be visible from 50 yards away. Start over on that section." Vaughn's face reddened, but he complied, started pulling out stitches he'd spent 20 minutes putting in. Monroe continued circulating, stopped at Bryn's table, examined her work without touching it. Instructors rarely touch student work unless they were correcting something. "Where'd you learn that stitching pattern?" "Ranch work, Sergeant. Repairs. Mending tarps and fixing torn gear. Same principle as this, just different application." Monroe studied the suit more closely, bending down to examine the layering technique. "That's not random. There's a logic to it. Different densities in different areas." "Yes, Sergeant. Pattern breaks up at close range and far range. Different densities create depth. The eye expects flat patterns. This creates three-dimensional texture that confuses depth perception." He made a note on his clipboard, said nothing else but nodded once before moving on. By the end of the day, most students had completed the basic structure of their suits. Tomorrow they'd add vegetation and do field testing. That evening, Bryn took her suit outside to the tree line behind the barracks, studied the local terrain in the fading light. Pine needles were abundant, certain types of grass, small branches with leaves still attached, Spanish moss hanging from some of the older trees. She began incorporating vegetation, attaching it with wire ties that could be easily replaced. The suit had to be adaptable. What worked in pine forest wouldn't work in open fields. What worked in Georgia wouldn't work in desert or mountains. A good ghillie suit was a living thing, constantly updated to match the environment. She worked until the light failed and she couldn't see the difference between dark green and dark brown anymore. In the common room, several soldiers were comparing their suits, holding them up against the wall, discussing techniques, the kind of professional talk that happened when soldiers were genuinely interested in mastering a skill. Tucker Vaughn saw Bryn walk past with her suit over her shoulder, called out, "Hey Keller, where'd you learn to make that? YouTube tutorial?" She stopped, turned, looked at him directly with an expression that gave nothing away. "No, my uncle taught me when I was 15, for hunting mule deer. You?" Vaughn's smile faltered. "Army taught us basic camouflage construction in Ranger School. 3-day course. Then you already have the fundamentals. Just apply them. Practice makes better." She continued to her room without waiting for a response. Didn't need to see his reaction. Didn't care about his reaction. Later, Dawson Reed knocked on her door frame. She'd left it open while organizing gear for tomorrow's stalking exercise. "Can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "Why do you let them talk like that?" "Vaughn." The others making comments. "You could shut them down. You outrank most of them." Captain versus specialist. You could pull rank and make them stop. Bryn continued arranging her equipment, sorting things into the order she'd need them. Because words don't matter. Performance matters. If I respond to every comment, every insinuation, every doubt, I'm playing their game. Better to just do the work and let the results speak. Results are the only language that matters here. That takes discipline. More discipline than most people have. So does this whole course. That's the point. They're not just testing shooting skills. They're testing whether we can maintain focus and discipline under constant pressure. If I let Vaughn's comments get to me, I'm failing that test. Reed nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I think you're going to make it. I've been watching how you work. Your fundamentals are solid. You don't rush. You don't panic. You don't show off. Those are the things that get people through this course. Not talent, discipline." "Thanks, but we're only on day 8, 21 more to go. A lot can happen in 21 days. "True, but my money's on you. Actually, I've got $20 riding on it with Vaughn." Bryn allowed herself a small smile. "Don't bet money you can't afford to lose." "I'm not worried. I've seen you shoot. I've seen how you handle yourself. You're going to make it." After he left, Bryn sat on her bunk and allowed herself a moment of honest assessment. She was doing well. Better than expected in some areas. Her shooting was strong. Her land navigation was solid. Her physical fitness was adequate for the demands of the course. But the hardest parts were still coming. Stalking exercises where you had to cover ground without being detected by trained observers with binoculars and decades of experience. Unknown distance shooting in variable conditions where you had to calculate everything on the fly. The final qualification where everything came together under maximum pressure and the difference between graduation and failure was measured in inches. And all of it while carrying the knowledge that failure meant more than just personal disappointment. It meant setting back the cause of every woman who might come after her. She thought about calling Uncle James, just to hear his voice, to get that steady perspective that had guided her for 26 years. But it was late, and she knew what he'd say anyway. Just do the work, kiddo. One task at a time. You don't climb a mountain by looking at the summit and getting overwhelmed. You climb it one step at a time, one foot in front of the other. Before you know it, you're at the top. She lay back on her bunk. Outside, Georgia crickets sang their evening songs. Somewhere in the distance, a training exercise was underway, the faint pop of blank ammunition carrying on the humid air. Tomorrow would bring the stalking exercise, the test that would separate those who understood camouflage from those who just wore it. And Bryn was ready. She'd been practicing invisibility since she was 15 years old, becoming part of the Oregon hills while hunting deer that could spot human movement at 300 yards. Animals that had been hunted for thousands of years and had evolved incredible detection abilities. The principles didn't change just because the audience did. Become part of the terrain. Move like water when you move. When you stop, become stone. Patience over speed. Certainty over haste. The same lessons Uncle James had taught her 1,000 times. She closed her eyes and let sleep come. The ghost in the grass. Day 9 dawned clear and hot, the kind of Georgia morning where the sun came up angry and the temperature hit 80 degrees before most people finished breakfast. The stalking exercise area was 2 miles from the main compound, a rolling field with scattered vegetation, slight elevation changes, and limited cover. The kind of terrain that looked easy from a distance, but was actually brutal for concealment. Open enough that you felt exposed, varied enough that you had to constantly adapt. Master Sergeant Brennan stood at the starting line with the class assembled before him. Behind him, 2 instructor towers rose 15 feet in the air, giving elevated views of the entire field. Like hunting stands, but for hunting students instead of deer. The objective is simple, Brennan said. From your starting position 200 yards out, stalk to within 150 yards of the target. You must remain undetected by the walkers, who will patrol the field looking for movement. You must reach the final firing position, identify yourself via radio, and demonstrate that you have a clear shot at the target. He gestured to 3 instructors wearing high-visibility orange vests, standing in the field with binoculars. The walkers will patrol constantly. They're experienced. They know what to look for. If they spot you, you fail. If you're spotted from the towers, you fail. If you take longer than 3 hours, you fail. This is not about speed. It's about patience and fieldcraft. Staff Sergeant Monroe added, "You'll go one at a time. We need to evaluate individual performance, not group movement. This isn't a team event. Draw numbers to determine order." Tucker Vaughn drew number 1. His face showed frustration. Going first meant no opportunity to learn from others' mistakes, no chance to see what worked and what didn't. Dawson Reed drew 5. Several others drew their numbers in sequence, soldiers calling out numbers and stepping aside. Bryn drew 17. Near the end of the order, that meant she'd spend most of the day watching and learning, understanding the patrol patterns, seeing where students were getting spotted, learning from their failures. Vaughn moved to the starting position at 700 hours. From there, the target flag was barely visible, a small orange marker near a lone tree in the middle distance. Brennan keyed his radio. "Walker 1, 2, 3, begin patrol. Student 1, you may begin when ready." Vaughn started his stalk. He moved low, using what little vegetation existed. crawling through patches of grass that barely came up to his knees. But even from the starting line, Bryn could see his mistakes. Moving too fast, creating a wake of movement in the grass like a shark fin through water. Not reading the micro-terrain for the dead spaces that would give him concealment from the elevated observation points. 8 minutes later, Walker 2 raised his hand. Visual contact. Student spotted at approximately 60 yards. Vaughn stood up, frustration clear on his face. He'd made it barely a third of the way. Student 2 fared better, made it 120 yards before being spotted from the tower. Too much movement, too fast. Student 3 reached 140 yards. Close, but not close enough. Spotted when he tried to cross an open area without waiting for the right moment. Dawson Reed went 5th. He moved with careful deliberation, using every depression and shadow line. Took his time. Made it to 155 yards, just 5 yards past the requirement. Officially passed, though barely. The morning wore on. Some students passed, more failed. The successful ones all shared common traits: extreme patience, careful route selection, ability to stay absolutely motionless when walkers came close. By noon, 12 students had attempted the course. 7 had failed. At 13:30 hours, Bryn's number was called. She moved to the starting position, studied the terrain through her binoculars for a full 5 minutes before moving, identified the dead spaces, the micro-terrain features that would provide concealment, plotted not the fastest route, but the safest, the route that minimized exposure to the towers and avoided areas where walkers seemed to focus their attention. The key was understanding what the observers could see. From ground level, the walkers had limited perspective. They could see movement and anything that contrasted with the background. But the towers had elevated views that could spot anything moving against the skyline or creating shadows that didn't belong. Different threats required different tactics. She'd need to stay in the low areas, move only when vegetation or terrain masked her from the towers. Time her movements for when walkers were looking elsewhere. Read the patterns, exploit the gaps. Brennan's voice came over the radio. "Student 17, you may begin when ready." Bryn adjusted her ghillie suit, making sure all the vegetation was properly attached. Check that nothing would snag or create noise. Then began. The first 50 yards took her 40 minutes. She moved in short bursts of 5 to 10 feet, then remained absolutely still for several minutes, watching, learning the patrol patterns, understanding the rhythm of the walkers' movements. One of them, a younger sergeant, was methodical. Left to right sweeps every 3 minutes. The second walker was more random, but tended to focus on the areas with the most vegetation. The third walker seemed bored, going through the motions. That was the dangerous one. Bored people sometimes saw things in their peripheral vision that focused people missed. Walker 1 passed within 20 feet of her at the 40-minute mark. She could hear his boots in the grass, could hear him breathing, could hear the slight rustle of his clothing as he walked. She didn't move, didn't even blink. Her breathing was so shallow it was barely perceptible. Every muscle locked in position. He walked past without seeing her. She waited another 5 minutes, then continued forward. The Georgia sun beat down. Inside the ghillie suit, the temperature had to be over 100 degrees. Sweat ran down her face, stinging her eyes, pooling in her collar, soaking her uniform. She couldn't wipe it away. Any movement might give her away. Pain is just data. It's not in charge. At the 90-minute mark, she'd covered 80 yards, not even halfway, but she was in a good position. A shallow depression that gave her complete concealment from the towers and limited visibility from the ground. She waited there for 20 minutes, letting a walker pass, letting the tower observers scan other areas of the field. Patience, Uncle James's voice in her head. Patience defeats panic. Then continued. The vegetation changed slightly as she moved forward. Less grass, more bare dirt. That meant more careful movement, slower progress. Dirt showed disturbance more easily than grass. Every movement left a mark that observers might notice. She modified her technique. Instead of the traditional low crawl, she used what Uncle James had called the side stroke method. Lying on her side, using her legs to push, keeping her profile as low as possible. Minimal ground disturbance, slow but certain, inch by inch, foot by foot. The stalking exercise continued. Bryn moved through the Georgia field like water finding its path. At 2 hours and 17 minutes, she keyed her radio from 145 yards. Student 17, in position. Brennan's voice came back. Stand and identify yourself. She rose slowly from the earth. Pine needles and grass fell away. The ghillie suit had become so much a part of the terrain that standing created a visible transformation. Brennan and Monroe walked to her position. They stood, looking at the ground where she'd been lying, examining the minimal disturbance she'd created. Monroe paced off the distance with a rangefinder. 145 yards. Pass. Brennan looked at her directly. How long were you in that final position before you called it in? Approximately 3 minutes, Sergeant. Why didn't you call it in immediately upon reaching the required distance? I wanted to ensure I had a solid firing position and complete concealment before breaking radio silence, Sergeant. Brennan nodded slowly. Walker 2 passed within how many feet of your position during the stalk? 8 to 10 feet, Sergeant. Did you consider moving when you saw him approaching? No, Sergeant. Movement draws the eye. Stillness creates invisibility. Monroe stepped closer. That side stroke technique you use in the final approach. Where did you learn that? That's not in any Army manual I've seen. My uncle taught me, Sergeant, for hunting in terrain with sparse cover. When you can't hide behind things, you become part of the ground itself. The two instructors exchanged a look. Something passed between them. Recognition, maybe. Brennan said, that was the longest successful stalk we've seen this class. 2 hours and 47 minutes to cover 150 yards. Most students who pass do it in 90 minutes to 2 hours. They rush. Part 3, The Reckoning, Storm and Steel. Week 3 arrived with weather that looked like punishment from an angry god. Dark clouds rolled in from the west on day 15, bringing humidity so thick it felt like breathing through a wet cloth. The sky had that bruised purple appearance that promised rain before noon, and possibly thunder that would make outdoor training interesting. Master Sergeant Brennan stood at the range briefing area, seemingly unconcerned by the approaching storm. Behind him, 3 target arrays were visible at varying distances, steel silhouettes that would ring when hit, providing instant feedback. Today we test unknown distance engagement, he announced to the assembled students. 19 soldiers now, down from the original 28. 9 had washed out, Emma on land nav, others on various failures. The class was being refined like ore in a furnace. You will engage 3 targets. You do not know the exact distances. You will range them using your equipment, calculate your holds, and engage. You have 60 seconds per target. 3 targets total. Weather is not a factor in grading. Real-world conditions are never ideal. Learn to work with what you have. Staff Sergeant Monroe added, targets are at 300, 550, and 780 yards, plus or minus 10 yards. Wind is currently 15 miles per hour, gusting to 20. Rain is expected within the hour. Barometric pressure is dropping. If you cannot adapt to changing conditions, you cannot function as a sniper in the real world. The students drew numbers for firing order, the ritual that determined who would shoot and when. Tucker Vaughn drew early again, number 3. His face showed resignation. He'd been struggling since the stalking failure, his confidence visibly shaken. The cocky energy from the first week was gone, replaced by determination mixed with doubt. Dawson Reed drew 7. Several others filled out the middle positions. Bryn drew 15, second to last. That meant she'd have the worst conditions. The rain would be falling by then. Wind would be unpredictable. But it also meant she'd have time to observe and learn. The first student stepped to the line at 0800 hours. By 0815, light rain had begun. Gentle drops that didn't seem like much but changed everything. Visibility decreased. Mirage patterns in the scopes shifted. Wind became harder to read. By the time the fourth student fired, it was a steady drizzle that reduced visibility in complicated wind reading. Soldiers were getting wet. Equipment was getting wet. The concrete firing line was becoming slick. Tucker Vaughn approached the firing line for his turn. Through the rain, Bryn could see his jaw set with determination. He'd been practicing every spare moment since his stalking failure, trying to rebuild what had been shaken. Spending extra hours on the range, asking instructors questions, working harder than she'd ever seen him work. He ranged his targets with the laser rangefinder, made his calculations, checked his data book where he'd written notes about previous shoots. Fired at the 300-yard steel. Hit. The metallic ring carried across the range, even through the rain. Second target, 550 yards. He took longer this time, studying the rain, the wind indicators, the flags hanging limp and wet. Fired. Miss. The round impacted dirt behind the target, creating a small splash of mud. He cycled the bolt, adjusted his scope, fired again. Hit. Third target, 780 yards. The rain was intensifying, wind gusting unpredictably. He studied it for 30 seconds, clearly fighting internal doubt, made his adjustment, fired. Miss. Out of time. 2 out of 3 targets. Passing, but not distinguished. Not the performance he wanted. As he walked off the line, Bryn saw the frustration in his posture. Shoulders tight, jaw clenched. He was capable of better, but the conditions had gotten inside his head. The morning progressed. Most students hit 2 of 3 targets. One exceptional shooter hit all 3. Several hit only 1, receiving failing marks for the evolution. The rain sorted the prepared from the unprepared. By the time student 14 finished, the rain had become heavy. Not quite a downpour, but persistent rain that soaked everything and created mirage effects in the scopes that made ranging difficult. Dawson Reed was student 14. He approached the line with visible apprehension. Rain dripped from his cap brim, running down his face. He ranged the first target, adjusted for the rain, fired, hit. Second target, longer calculation, consultation with his data book, fired, hit. Third target, the 780-yard steel, barely visible through rain and mist. He took the full 60 seconds, making adjustments, second-guessing himself, changing his mind twice. Finally fired. Miss. 2 out of 3. He walked off looking disappointed but not defeated. He'd passed. That was what mattered. Student 15 fired. Hit 1 target, missed 2. Failed the evolution. Would have to repeat or wash out. Then it was Bryn's turn. She approached the firing line at 11:45 hours. The rain was steady, wind gusting between 15 and 25 miles per hour from roughly 10 o'clock. The kind of conditions that would make most recreational shooters pack up their equipment and go home. The kind of conditions that made you question why you were out there at all. But these weren't recreational conditions. They were real-world conditions. The kind of weather that didn't care about your comfort or your schedule or your preferences. She assumed her prone position. The ground was wet, mud already forming under her elbows, water soaking through her uniform. She didn't care. Discomfort was just data, information about the environment, not a reason to perform poorly. Through her scope, she ranged the first target. The laser rangefinder read 307 yards. Close enough to 300 that the difference barely mattered for hold calculation. But the wind did matter. And the rain. Rain affected bullet trajectory, but not as much as most people thought. The drops themselves had minimal impact. The real issue was the wind and how rain changed air density, invisibility, and wind patterns. She watched the grass between her position and the target, watched how it bent, left to right, gusting, not consistent. The kind of wind that required timing, not just calculation. She made her windage calculation, settled her breathing, waited for a lull in the wind. Patience, always patience. Squeezed the trigger. The steel rang. Center mass hit. Brennan's voice from the tower. Hit. Continue. Second target. She ranged it. 553 yards. The wind was shifting. She could see it in the vegetation patterns. Grass bending one direction, then another. What had been a left-to-right wind was now quartering, coming from forward left. That changed everything. A quartering wind pushed the bullet differently than a pure crosswind. You had to calculate the vector components. Forward component and lateral component. More complex math in the 60-second time limit. She calculated her hold. 0.7 of a mil for wind. 3.8 mils for elevation. Rain impact minimal at this range. But she didn't fire immediately. Waited. Watched the grass. Watched the mirage patterns in her scope. The way heat and rain created optical distortions that told stories about what the air was doing. The wind steadied for just a moment. Not calm, but consistent. A pattern she could work with. She fired. Hit. The ring of steel confirmation. Hit. Continue to final target. The 780-yard steel was barely visible through the rain. At that distance, the round would be in flight for just over a second. A lot could happen in a second. A lot of wind, a lot of vertical and horizontal drift, a lot of variables she couldn't control. She ranged it, 784 yards. Made her initial calculations. 6.8 mils elevation, 2.1 mils right windage for the quartering wind and Coriolis drift combined. But something felt wrong. The numbers were mathematically correct, but instinct said they weren't complete. That feeling Uncle James had taught her to trust. The feeling that came from 10,000 shots in 10,000 conditions. She thought back to a conversation with Uncle James years ago. They'd been shooting in rain, similar conditions to this. He told her something that wasn't in any manual, wasn't in any training program. Rain changes how light moves through air, changes how your scope shows you the target. What you see isn't quite where the target is. Trust your numbers more than your eyes when conditions get weird. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, ran the calculation again in her head, felt the wind on her left cheek, heard it moving through the trees behind the tower, listened to what it was telling her, opened her eyes, made a slight adjustment, another 1/4 mil right windage. Nothing the math strictly required, but something her instinct demanded. The difference between correct and complete. Settled the crosshairs on a point in space where mathematics and experience said the bullet would meet the target. 30 seconds left on the clock. Her breathing slowed until it was barely perceptible. Her heartbeat became background noise. The world narrowed to the reticle and the barely visible steel in the space between them. She squeezed. The rifle bucked. Through the scope she watched, waiting. The second of flight time felt like an hour. From the tower, Brennan's voice after a long pause. Hit. Dead center. She stood, cleared her weapon, shouldered her rifle. No celebration, no emotion, just the work, completed. But as she walked off the line, she heard Tucker Vaughn's voice from where the students stood watching under a shelter. Lucky shot. She stopped, turned to face him. Her uniform was soaked. Rain dripped from her cap. She looked him directly in the eyes. Her voice was calm, even. Want me to do it again? Complete silence. The rain drummed on the range roof. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. Students shifted uncomfortably. You didn't challenge instructors. You didn't volunteer for extra work. You took your pass and moved on. Everyone knew the rules. But something in Bryn had shifted. She was tired of the quiet doubts, tired of the whispers, tired of being good enough to pass, but not good enough to be believed. Tired of every success being attributed to luck or favorable conditions or anything except skill. Monroe and Brennan exchanged a glance from their positions. Something unspoken passed between them. Brennan's voice carried across the range. Go ahead, Captain. Same target. Whenever you're ready. Bryn returned to the firing line, assumed her position again. The mud was deeper now, her uniform completely soaked through, water running down her arms. She didn't use the rangefinder this time. She'd already ranged the target, knew the distance. 784 yards. The conditions hadn't changed significantly in the 30 seconds since her first shot. This wasn't about gathering data. This was about demonstrating mastery, about proving that the first shot wasn't luck, about showing that she could do it again when everyone was watching and doubt was thick in the air. She chambered a fresh round, settled into her sight picture. The target was still barely visible through intensifying rain. Made the same calculations, same holds, but this time the wind had shifted slightly. More velocity, still quartering from forward left, but stronger. Gusts hitting 25 instead of 20. She adjusted, added another half-mil right, trusted her instinct, trusted 10,000 shots that had taught her body to read conditions her conscious mind couldn't fully articulate. Fired. The pause felt eternal. Rain fell. Thunder rumbled closer. The world held its breath. Brennan's voice. Impact. 6 inches left of the first shot. Wind drift pushed it. That's a confirmed kill. Both times. Both center mass on a man-sized target. She stood, cleared her weapon again, walked off the line. The assembled students were silent. No comments, no whispers. The kind of silence that comes when people have just witnessed something that challenges their assumptions. Dawson Reed was the first to speak, his voice quiet but audible in the silence. That's not luck. That's something else. That's something I don't have. Monroe approached her as she was cleaning her rifle at the equipment table, running a rag through the wet barrel. Captain Keller, walk with me. They moved away from the other students, toward the tree line where rain pattered on pine needles and created its own music. Monroe was quiet for a long moment, just walking in the rain. Finally, that second shot, why did you add additional windage beyond what you used the first time? Wind had increased, Sergeant. Gusts were stronger, more consistent from the same direction. You didn't use a wind meter the second time, didn't check the flags. No, Sergeant. I read it through vegetation movement and feel. Feel? Yes, Sergeant. Monroe stopped walking and turned to face her. How long have you been shooting? 26 years, Sergeant, since I was 12. And in those 26 years, how many shots have you taken? Rough estimate. Bryn considered. Practice sessions with Uncle James, hunting seasons, target shooting, competition with herself. Thousands upon thousands of repetitions. Tens of thousands, Sergeant. Maybe more. I stopped counting years ago. And that's why you don't need instruments for everything. You've internalized what the instruments measure. Your body knows what 15 miles per hour of wind from 10 o'clock feels like because you've shot in it 1,000 times. Yes, Sergeant. That second shot wasn't about proving Specialist Vaughn wrong, was it? No, Sergeant. It was about proving to myself that I belong here, that this isn't beginner's luck, or favorable conditions, or help from others, that I can deliver under pressure when everyone's watching and doubting. Monroe nodded slowly. You've already proven that, Captain, to everyone who matters. The students who doubt you, they're dealing with their own insecurities, their own fears about what it means if a woman can outshoot them. That's not your problem to solve. He paused, rain running down his face. Master Sergeant Brennan wants to see you this evening. 1800 hours. His office. Don't be late. Roger, Sergeant. That afternoon, Bryn sat in her barracks room, cleaning her rifle for what felt like the 100th time since the course began. The rain continued outside, steady and relentless, turning Fort Moore into a muddy swamp. She thought about the shot, about the challenge, about Vaughn's comment that had triggered something she'd been holding back for weeks. Had it been the right decision? To challenge herself publicly like that? To volunteer for extra scrutiny? Uncle James would probably say it was unnecessary, that the first hit was proof enough. that seeking additional validation was a sign of caring too much about others' opinions instead of focusing on the mission. But another part of her knew it had been necessary, not for Vaughn, not for the other students, for herself, to know with absolute certainty that she could deliver when everything was on the line, when everyone was watching, when failure would confirm every doubt anyone had ever expressed about women in combat roles. At 1800 hours, she reported to Brennan's office, knocked twice on the doorframe. Enter. The office was small, walls covered with photographs of previous graduating classes. Decades of snipers who had passed through this course, standing in formation with their hard-earned tabs. All men, until now. Hundreds of faces, thousands of stories, all successful, all proven. Brennan sat behind his desk, gestured to a chair. "Sit down, Captain." She sat. The chair was old, probably from the 1980s, with worn padding and creaking joints. He poured 2 cups of coffee from a pot on the credenza behind him, handed her one. The gesture felt significant, informal, almost ceremonial. Officers and NCOs didn't typically share coffee like equals, unless something important was being discussed. "I've been running this course for 12 years, Brennan said, settling into his own chair. "I've graduated over 200 snipers, soldiers who've gone on to serve in every combat zone where America has deployed forces. I've seen 5 perfect scores on the final qualification in all that time. 5 out of 200. He sipped his coffee, Army coffee, strong enough to stand a spoon in. "I've seen maybe 10 shooters with what I'd call natural ability, the kind of instinct that can't be taught in any school. You either have it or you don't. No amount of practice creates it. Practice refines it, but the core ability is something you're born with." He looked at her directly. "You have it. That much is obvious. The question I've been asking myself is where it came from. Your file shows standard Army training, good performance, but nothing that screams sniper. No advanced marksmanship schools, no competition shooting background, just solid, consistent performance as a cavalry scout. But then Staff Sergeant Monroe talked to your uncle." Bryn said nothing, waited, sipped the coffee that burned her tongue. "Your uncle told him about the Coyote, the 940-yard shot when you were 14 years old. Told him you've been hunting and shooting since you were 12, that you've probably taken more precision shots than most soldiers take in their entire careers. That you were making shots at 15 that he'd seen trained snipers miss at 30. Brennan leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. "Here's what I need you to understand, Captain. You're not here proving that women can be snipers. You're here proving that you specifically can be a sniper. And from what I've seen, that question was answered in the first week. You've already proven you have the skills. You've proven you have the temperament. You've proven you have the discipline. Then what am I doing here for the remaining time, Sergeant?" "Learning our way. The Army way. Your uncle taught you to shoot, taught you field craft that's probably better than what we teach here. But there's a difference between being a skilled hunter and being a military sniper. We operate differently. We have protocols, standards, ways of doing things that exist for reasons you won't understand until you're in combat with a team depending on you." He set down his coffee cup, the sound loud in the small office. "Final qualification is in 1 week, day 22. Between now and then, you're going to learn about sniper operations in a military context. Team movement, communication protocols, target identification procedures, rules of engagement. The technical shooting, you've got that. But being a sniper is more than pulling a trigger. It's being part of a weapon system that includes you, your spotter, your team, your command structure." "I understand, Sergeant." "Do you?" His voice wasn't harsh, but it was pointed, direct. "Because what you did today on the range, that second shot, that was about pride, about proving something to yourself and others. In combat, pride gets people killed. You take the shot you need to take, not the shot that makes you feel better about yourself, not the shot that proves you're as good as everyone else. Just the shot that accomplishes the mission. The words hit harder than Bryn expected. Truth often did. You're right, Sergeant. It won't happen again. Brennan's expression softened slightly. The hard edges became less sharp. I'm not criticizing your ability. I'm teaching you discipline. You have remarkable talent. Natural ability that most people would kill for. But talent without discipline is just potential. And potential doesn't graduate from this course. Performance does. Disciplined, consistent, mission-focused performance. Yes, Sergeant. One more thing. Final qualification is 10 shots at unknown distances from 200 to 1,000 yards. You need 8 hits to pass. Historically, about 40% of students who make it to the final fail. The pressure is enormous. The conditions are never ideal. Most students overthink it and fall apart. They second-guess every decision. They let the pressure get inside their heads. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. You won't. You've been doing this since before most of these soldiers knew what a rifle was. You've been making difficult shots under pressure since you were 14 years old. Just remember, you're not competing against them. You're not proving anything to them. You're not carrying the weight of all women everywhere. You're just hitting targets. That's all. Targets that don't care who you are or what you represent. They just exist. Hit them. Everything else is noise. Uncle James's words coming from a different voice. The same truth expressed by different people who understood it. Roger, Sergeant. Dismissed. She stood, saluted. He returned it. She walked out into the rain-soaked evening, her mind turning over everything he'd said. The quiet before. The next 6 days passed in a blur of instruction and preparation. The final sprint before the ultimate test. Classroom sessions on target identification. How to distinguish combatants from civilians at distance when both might be wearing similar clothing. The rules of engagement that govern when snipers could and couldn't take shots. The legal and ethical frameworks that separated military snipers from assassins. War crimes and Geneva Conventions, and the laws that applied even in chaos. Field exercises on team movement. How 2 snipers worked together, one shooting while the other spotted and provided security. How they communicated without radios when silence was required. Hand signals that had been developed over decades. The intricate dance of coordination that kept both operators safe and effective while accomplishing the mission. Bryn absorbed it all. These were the pieces she'd been missing. The military framework that transformed individual skill into professional capability. The difference between being a good shooter and being a military sniper. Tucker Vaughn had changed after the range incident, not dramatically, but noticeably. The edges had softened. He still trained hard, still competed with himself and others, but the edge of resentment was gone, replaced by something closer to respect. He'd started asking her questions occasionally, genuine inquiries about technique, not challenges disguised as questions. One evening, he approached her during equipment maintenance in the common area where soldiers cleaned weapons and prepared for the next day. Can I ask you something? Go ahead. That second shot, the 780-yarder in the rain, how'd you know to add extra windage when you didn't use the wind meter the second time? Bryn continued cleaning her rifle, the repetitive motion automatic after weeks of practice. Experience. I've shot in similar conditions hundreds of times over the years. Your body learns patterns even when your conscious mind doesn't actively notice. The wind on your face tells you things. The sound of it in the trees. The way grass moves. After enough repetitions, you don't need instruments for everything. Is that something you can teach, or do you just have to do it until it clicks? Both. You can learn the principles, understand the theory, but application comes from repetition. Thousands of repetitions in different conditions. There's no shortcut. You can't download it. You have to earn it. Vaughn nodded slowly, processing. I don't think I'm going to make it. The final qual. I'm barely passing most evolutions. I'm not confident like you are. She looked at him, really looked at him, saw the doubt there. The fear. What's your weakest area? Wind reading. I overthink it, second guess myself. By the time I commit to a solution, I've talked myself out of 3 different answers. My brain gets in my own way. You're trying to calculate perfectly instead of calculating adequately. Wind is never perfectly predictable. It changes constantly. You make your best estimate based on available data, and you commit. Hesitation kills accuracy more than imperfect data. Better to be decisive with good data than paralyzed trying to get perfect data. How do you commit when you're not sure? You trust your training, trust your process, trust that you've practiced enough that your first answer is probably right. The target doesn't know if you're confident or not. The target doesn't care about your internal dialogue. It just knows if you hit it. Vaughn smiled slightly. Targets don't care. I've heard that before. From you, from the instructors. I'm starting to believe it. Because it's true. It's maybe the truest thing about this whole course. He stood to leave, then paused at the doorway. For what it's worth, I hope you make it. I was wrong about you at the start. I thought women in this course would somehow lower standards or change what it meant to be a sniper. But you're not lowering anything. You're raising the bar for all of us, making us all work harder. That's a good thing, even when it's uncomfortable. After he left, Dawson Reed appeared from the hallway. That's real growth right there. Tucker's not a bad guy. He was just scared of change, scared of what it meant if his assumptions were wrong. Most people are scared of change. That's human nature. You nervous about the final? Bryn considered the question honestly. No, I'm ready. I've been ready since before I got here. The course has taught me the Army way in the military context, but the fundamentals were there before I arrived. Must be nice having that kind of confidence. It's not confidence, it's just knowledge. I know what I can do because I've done it before, 1,000 times before. The Army didn't invent precision shooting. They just systematized it and applied it in a military context. Reed laughed. I'm going to miss these conversations when we graduate. If we graduate, you have a way of making complicated things sound simple. That's because they are simple, not easy, but simple. There's a difference. On day 21, the day before final qualification, Master Sergeant Brennan called the remaining students together. 16 now. 3 more had washed out over the past week, unable to maintain the standard under cumulative pressure. Tomorrow is what you came here for, Brennan said, his voice carrying across the formation. Everything up to this point has been preparation. Tomorrow you demonstrate that you can apply everything you've learned under maximum pressure. 10 shots, unknown distances from 200 to 1,000 yards, variable conditions whatever weather we get. You need 8 hits to pass. 8 out of 10. That's 80%. Anything less and you go home. He paused, scanning the assembled soldiers with eyes that had seen this moment hundreds of times before. Some of you will pass, some of you won't. That's the nature of standards. They don't bend to accommodate effort or desire or how badly you want it. They simply exist. If you meet them, you graduate. If you don't, you go home. That's the only equation that matters tomorrow. Staff Sergeant Monroe added, weather forecast shows clear skies but high winds, 15 to 25 mile per hour gusts from the northwest. Not ideal shooting conditions, but workable. We've had finals in worse. Get a good night's sleep, eat a solid breakfast, hydrate properly, show up ready to work. This is what you've been training for. That evening, Bryn sat on her bunk and called Uncle James one final time before the qualification. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. How you feeling, kiddo? Tomorrow's the big day. Ready, more than ready. I've been doing this my whole life. Tomorrow is just another day of shooting. That's the right attitude. Remember the coyote? You keep bringing up the coyote because it's the perfect metaphor. You were 14. You had no formal training in ballistics or atmospheric conditions or any of the science they're teaching you now. You just had fundamentals and patience and instinct. And you made a shot that grown men with decades of experience would be proud of. Made it look easy because you didn't know it was supposed to be hard. He paused. She could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, could picture him in his workshop, probably working on some piece of equipment that needed repair. Tomorrow is the same thing, Bryn. Just targets, just distance and wind and mathematics. You've done this 10,000 times. The only difference is other people are watching. But the targets don't know that. They don't care. They don't care if you're the first woman or the 100th man. They don't care about politics or history or what this means for anyone else. They just exist at whatever distance they're at, and you just have to hit them. Uncle James? Yeah, kiddo. Thank you for everything, for teaching me, for believing in me when nobody else did, for seeing something in that 12-year-old girl that she didn't see in herself. His voice got quiet, the way it did when he was dealing with emotions he didn't know how to express. I didn't teach you belief, Bryn. You had that already. You had it when you were 10 years old watching your father's funeral and deciding you'd never be careless with a weapon. You had it when you were 12 and asked me to teach you to shoot. You had it when you enlisted at 30 when everyone said you were too old. I just taught you how to aim it, how to focus it, how to turn it into something useful. They talked for a few more minutes about the ranch, about a new calf that had been born, about normal life continuing while she was in this crucible, the mundane details that kept her grounded. After hanging up, she lay back on her bunk and stared at the ceiling. Outside, Georgia night sounds filtered through the window, crickets and distant thunder and the ever-present humidity. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. From a ranch in California, to college, to late enlistment, to the 173rd Airborne, to sniper school. Every step had been preparation for tomorrow. Every shot she'd ever taken had been practice for the shots that mattered. She thought about Vanessa Morrison, laughing in that cafeteria 2 years ago. You'll never make it. She thought about Emma Sullivan, washing out on land navigation, carrying the weight of failure. She thought about every doubt, every whisper, every bet placed against her survival in this course. And she smiled in the darkness, because tomorrow, all of that would be answered, not with words, not with arguments or explanations or justifications, with 10 shots, at distances from 200 to 1,000 yards, in whatever conditions the Georgia sky decided to provide. 10 shots to prove everything that needed proving. She closed her eyes and slept the sleep of someone who knew exactly what was coming and exactly how to handle it. Tomorrow would be just another day of hitting targets, and she'd been hitting targets since she was 12 years old. The final measure. Day 22 dawned clear and cool. Unusual for Georgia in November, but welcome. The class assembled at 600 hours in the pre-dawn darkness. 16 students, looking tired but determined. 4 weeks of constant pressure had worn everyone down to their essential elements. The facade was gone. What remained was truth. The range was different today, more formal. The target arrays were set at precise intervals. The instructor tower was fully staffed with multiple observers. This wasn't practice. This wasn't training. This was judgment. Master Sergeant Brennan stood before them, his voice carrying the weight of finality. Today you will each fire 10 rounds at 10 targets placed at unknown distances. Distances range from 200 to 1,000 yards. You will be given 60 seconds per target to range, calculate holds, and engage. You need 8 hits to pass this course. 8 out of 10. There are no second chances. There is no partial credit. You either meet the standard or you don't. Questions? Silence. The kind of silence that comes when everyone knows what's at stake. Outstanding. Draw numbers for firing order. Bryn drew number 14, middle to late in the sequence. That meant she'd watch others first, learn the conditions, observe the wind patterns, then apply everything she knew. The morning progressed with mechanical precision. Student after student stepped to the line, the sound of rifles firing, the ring of steel hits, or the thud of misses. The announcement of scores. Some passed, more failed, often by just 1 or 2 shots. The difference between 7 hits and 8 hits was the difference between going home and graduation, between success and failure, between proving you belonged and proving the doubters right. Tucker Vaughn fired 10th. Bryn watched carefully. He'd worked so hard over the past weeks, overcome so much doubt, rebuilt his confidence from nothing. He hit his first 5 targets. Smooth, confident shooting. His fundamentals were solid now. His win calls were better. His discipline had improved. Target 6 at 800 yards. He took too long calculating, second-guessed himself. Fired. Miss. The wind had shifted during his hesitation, and he'd used old data. Target 7. Hit. Back on track. Target 8. Hit. Confidence returning. Target 9. Hit. 1 target remaining. Target 10 at 1,000 yards. Maximum distance. The shot that separated good from great. He took the full 60 seconds, clearly fighting internal doubt and the weight of the moment. Fired. Miss. 7 out of 10. 1 short. Failed by a single shot. He stood from the firing line, face showing controlled devastation. 4 weeks of work, ended by a single miss. He'd be back next cycle if they let him try again. But today, he'd failed. As he walked past, Bryn caught his eye. She nodded once. Warrior acknowledgement. He'd given everything. Sometimes everything isn't enough. That's the nature of standards. Dawson Reed fired 13th. Hit 9 out of 10. Passed with room to spare. The relief on his face was visible as he cleared his weapon and walked off the line. He'd done it. He'd earned his tab. Then it was Bryn's turn. She approached the firing line at 11:27 hours. The wind was steady at 15 miles per hour from 2 o'clock, gusting occasionally to 20. The sky was clear, visibility perfect, temperature in the mid-60s, as close to ideal conditions as you could hope for. Behind her, she felt the weight of every eye. The remaining students, the instructors, the staff who'd heard about the woman in the class and wanted to see if she'd make it. She settled into her prone position, the familiar solidity of the ground beneath her, the rifle an extension of her body, the scope an extension of her eyes. This was her element. This was where she belonged. Target 1 appeared at 200 yards. She ranged it with the laser. 203 yards. Simple shot. Almost too simple. She made her adjustment and fired without overthinking it. Hit, hit, continue. Target 2 at 350 yards. Wind more pronounced at this distance. She calculated, adjusted for the 2 o'clock wind, fired. Hit, hit, continue. Target 3 at 500 yards. Exactly the kind of shot she'd made 1,000 times growing up. She fired without hesitation, her body knowing what to do before her mind finished calculating. Hit, hit, continue. Target 4 at 650 yards. The wind gusted just as she was about to fire. She waited, finger on the trigger, but not pulling. Let the gust pass. Fired when it settled to baseline. Hit, hit, continue. Target 5 at 800 yards. This was the range where atmospheric conditions started mattering more, where small errors compounded into misses, where luck ended and skill began. She calculated carefully. Temperature 58 degrees. Humidity moderate. Barometric pressure standard. Wind 15 miles per hour from 2 o'clock. All the variables that affected bullet flight over 3/4 of a mile. Made her adjustment. Trusted her calculation. Fired. Hit. Hit. Continue. 5 for 5. She needed 3 more hits out of 5 remaining shots to pass. But passing wasn't enough. Not for her. Not for what this meant. Target 6 at 850 yards. She ranged it, ran her calculation in the mental spreadsheet she'd built over 26 years. But something felt wrong. The math was correct, but her instinct disagreed slightly. She thought back to the range shot from the previous week, to Uncle James's voice echoing across the years. Trust your numbers more than your eyes, but trust your gut more than both. She added a quarter-mil windage beyond what the strict mathematics required, a correction based on feel and experience, and 10,000 shots that had taught her when the math was right and when it was incomplete. Fired. Hit. Hit. Continue. Target 7 at 900 yards. The wind was swirling now, less predictable than it had been. She watched the vegetation between her position and the target, saw it bend left, then right, then left again. No consistent pattern, no rhythm she could work with. She waited. 40 seconds remaining. 30 seconds. 20. Other students would panic, would force a shot, would accept imperfect conditions because time was running out. She waited. Patience. Always patience. The wind steadied. Not calm, but consistent. A pattern she could predict for the next few seconds. She fired. Hit. Hit. Continue. 7 for 7. One more hit guaranteed graduation. She'd already passed the threshold. The remaining 3 shots were technically unnecessary. But something in her refused to coast, refused to finish with anything less than her absolute best. This wasn't about passing, this was about mastery. Target 8 at 920 yards. She ranged it, made her calculation, fired with growing confidence that came from knowing she'd already succeeded. Hit. Hit. Continue. 8 for 8. Graduation secured. The tab was hers. Everything after this was excess. Unnecessary. Extra. But she wasn't done. Target 9 at 950 yards. She took her time even though she didn't need to, made the calculation as if it were the first shot of the day and everything depended on it. Because standards don't change based on what you've already accomplished. Fired. Hit. Hit. Continue. 9 for 9. 1 target remaining. 1,000 yards. The maximum effective range of the M24 sniper weapon system. The distance where everything mattered and nothing was guaranteed. Where the best shooters in the world sometimes missed despite perfect technique. Through her scope, the target was small, a steel silhouette barely visible at the extreme range of her optic. At this range, a human-sized target occupied minimal space in the reticle. The bullet would be in flight for over a second, an eternity for wind and gravity and atmospheric conditions to work their influence. She ranged it carefully, 1,003 yards, ran her calculation. Elevation, 7.9 mils. Substantial holdover. Windage, 2.6 mils right for the 2 o'clock wind and Coriolis drift combined. But she didn't fire immediately, closed her eyes for 3 seconds. The same 3-second pause she'd used since she was 14 years old. The moment of absolute focus before the trigger broke. She saw herself at 14 on that Oregon hillside, the 940-yard Coyote. Uncle James beside her saying it was too far. The impossible shot she'd made because she didn't know it was impossible. Because she hadn't been burdened by the weight of expectations. She saw Vanessa Morrison laughing in the cafeteria. "You'll never make it." She saw Emma Sullivan washing out, carrying the weight of representing all women. She saw every doubt, every whisper, every person who'd said she couldn't. And then she let it all go, released it like smoke. None of it mattered. None of it affected the physics of the shot. Opened her eyes, made a micro-adjustment, added one more click of windage. Something the math didn't strictly require, but her instinct demanded. The difference between textbook and mastery settled the crosshairs on a point in space where 26 years of experience told her the bullet and target would intersect. Slowed her breathing until it was barely perceptible. Her heartbeat became background noise, as irrelevant as traffic sounds from a distant highway. The world narrowed to the reticle and the target and the physics that would connect them. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle pushed back into her shoulder. The familiar recoil of 1,000 shots before this one. The sound. The feel, the knowledge that the bullet was in flight and there was nothing more she could do except wait for physics to finish its work. Through the scope, she watched the target, waiting for the impact that would take over a second to arrive. The pause stretched. Time moved like honey, like the moment between lightning and thunder, like holding your breath underwater. Then Brennan's voice, quiet but clear and carrying across the range. Impact, center mass. She stood, cleared her weapon with practiced movements, shouldered her rifle. 10 for 10, perfect score. As she turned from the firing line, she saw Brennan standing at attention, something she hadn't seen him do for any other student in 4 weeks. He approached with Monroe beside him, extended his hand. She shook it. "That's the first perfect score this class has seen in 2 years, Brennan said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Captain Keller, you've demonstrated complete mastery of every aspect of this course. Marksmanship, fieldcraft, mental discipline. Well done." "Thank you, Sergeant." Behind Brennan, the other students were watching. Reed was smiling openly. Others showed grudging respect that would eventually become genuine respect. Even Tucker Vaughn, who'd failed minutes earlier and was dealing with his own disappointment, was nodding with what looked like genuine admiration. Monroe approached from the tower. "Outstanding shooting, Captain. Textbook execution across all 10 engagements." Brennan addressed the remaining students still waiting to fire. "You've just witnessed what mastery looks like. Captain Keller didn't rush, didn't panic, didn't force anything, just applied fundamentals consistently across 10 different engagements at 10 different distances. That's the standard. That's what we're looking for. Calm, methodical, precise. That's what graduates from this course." The final 2 students fired after Bryn. One passed with 8 hits. The other failed with 7, joining Tucker Vaughn in the group that would go home without tabs. At the end of day 22, 15 soldiers had passed final qualification out of the original 28 who started. 13 men, 2 women, no wait, just 1 woman now. Emma was gone. 13 men, 1 woman. Tucker Vaughn was not among those who passed. Legacy. November 3rd, graduation day. The Fort Moore graduation field was packed with families, parents who'd driven or flown from across the country, spouses, children, people who'd supported these soldiers through 4 weeks of the hardest training the Army offered. The 15 graduates stood in formation, wearing their dress uniforms, boots polished to mirrors that reflected the morning sun, faces showing the exhaustion and pride of those who'd endured and prevailed. Bryn stood in that formation, 3rd row, center position. On her chest, her existing military decorations, airborne wings, deployment patches, the accumulated evidence of 7 years of service. By the end of today, she'd have one more, the sniper tab, black and gold, earned through 4 weeks of sustained excellence under pressure. In the crowd, she could see Uncle James, 56 years old now, wearing his Marine Corps jacket despite the Georgia heat, arms crossed in that characteristic stance. That slight smile that meant he was proud but wouldn't make a scene about it. Beside him, her mother wiping tears from her eyes. Her younger sister holding a small sign that said, "Sniper School Graduate," with a heart drawn in marker. They'd missed basic training because of COVID restrictions. This was the first time they'd seen her in uniform since her enlistment 7 years ago. Master Sergeant Brennan stood at the front of the formation. Behind him, a table with 15 black and gold tabs, each representing 4 weeks of sustained excellence, of meeting standards that didn't bend, of proving you belonged. The ceremony was brief. No long speeches about heroism or sacrifice, just facts, names called, tabs awarded, handshakes with the commandant. Captain Bryn Keller, she stepped forward, snapped a perfect salute that would have made her drill sergeant proud. The commandant, a full colonel with gray hair and combat patches from 3 wars, returned it. "Congratulations, Captain. You've earned this. You represent the highest standards of marksmanship and professionalism. Well done." He pinned the tab to her uniform. The weight was negligible, a few ounces of cloth and thread. But the meaning was everything. The meaning outweighed mountains. She saluted again. About-faced with precision. Returned to formation. When all 15 tabs had been awarded, Brennan spoke one final time. These soldiers have demonstrated the skills, discipline, and mental fortitude required of Army snipers. They will return to their units carrying this qualification. Some will serve in dedicated sniper sections. Others will use these skills to enhance their primary roles. All of them have proven they can perform under pressure when perfection is required, and anything less means failure. He paused, looking at each graduate individually. Class dismissed. The formation broke. Families rushed forward. Bryn found herself surrounded by her mother's embrace, her sister's excitement, Uncle James's quiet pride that needed no words. "You did it, kiddo," James said simply. 2 words that carried 26 years of history. "I had a good teacher. I taught you to shoot. The Army taught you to be a sniper. You taught yourself to endure." Her mother, who'd worried constantly about her late enlistment, her dangerous job, her determination to push herself into harder and harder schools, just held her and cried. Happy tears, proud tears, the tears of a mother who'd watched her daughter accomplish something extraordinary. Later, at a small restaurant off base, they celebrated quietly. No grand pronouncements, no speeches, just family, together, acknowledging what had been accomplished without needing to inflate it. Uncle James raised his coffee cup. To Bryn, who never let anyone tell her what she couldn't do, who turned every doubt into determination, who proved that excellence has no gender. They clinked cups, coffee and iced tea, simple celebration for a simple truth. The work was done. The standard had been met. The tab had been earned. That evening, Bryn received a text from an unknown number. "Captain Keller, this is Tucker Vaughn. I just wanted to say congratulations. You earned it. Every bit of it. Thank you for showing me what real dedication looks like, what real discipline looks like. I'll be back to try again next cycle. Going to practice everything you taught me, and I'll make it this time. TV." She smiled and typed a response. "You'll make it next time. Trust your process. Don't overthink. The targets don't care about your doubts. B.K." 3 days later, Bryn's orders arrived. She wasn't returning to the 173rd Airborne immediately. First, she had a 3-week assignment to the Arctic Sniper Course in Alaska as a student turned assistant instructor. They wanted her skills, her patience, her ability to communicate complex techniques to struggling students in terms they could understand. And after that, a permanent instructor position at Fort Moore if she wanted it. Teaching the next generation of snipers, passing forward everything Uncle James had taught her, everything the Army had taught her, everything she'd learned through 26 years of patient practice. She thought about it for exactly 10 seconds before accepting. Teaching wasn't a step backward, it was a step forward, a way to ensure that the door she'd pushed open stayed open for the women who'd come after her, a way to make sure Emma's attempt hadn't been in vain. 6 months later, Alaska, Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson, March cold that made Georgia humidity feel like a pleasant memory from a dream. Captain Bryn Keller stood at the edge of a snow-covered range, watching 8 students attempt long-range shots in sub-zero conditions that turned breath into ice crystals. 2 women, 6 men. The gender ratio was changing, slowly but changing. One of the women, Corporal Whitney Fletcher from Idaho, was struggling with a 700-yard wind call. The Arctic wind was brutal, unpredictable, nothing like the conditions she trained in. Nothing in the manuals prepared you for wind that could change 30 degrees in 3 seconds. Bryn approached, her boots crunching in snow. "Stop thinking. What's the wind telling you?" "I can't read it, ma'am. It keeps changing. Every time I think I have it figured out, it shifts." "Close your eyes. Feel it on your face. Listen to how it moves through the trees. Wind has patterns even when it seems random." Fletcher closed her eyes, doubt on her face, but willing to try. Stood there for 30 seconds, breathing, feeling, listening, then opened them and made an adjustment to her scope, changed her hold, settled her breathing, fired, hit. The steel rang clear in the cold air. Fletcher turned, surprise and pride mixed on her face. How did you know that would work? Because someone taught me the same thing when I was 12 years old. My uncle. On a ranch in Oregon. Now I'm teaching you. That's how knowledge survives. That's how skills get passed down. Generation to generation. Teacher to student. That's the real legacy. Later that day, Sergeant Tucker Vaughn arrived at the Alaska course. He'd made it through sniper school on his second attempt, graduating with 8 hits on the final qualification. Not perfect like Bryn's score, but enough. More than enough. He was assigned to the Arctic course for advanced cold weather sniper training. When he saw Bryn, he smiled with genuine warmth. Captain Keller, should have known you'd be here. Heard they were sending their best instructor to Alaska. Vaughn, heard you made it through on your second try. Congratulations. That takes guts, coming back after failing. Barely made it, used everything you taught me, trusted my process, stopped overthinking, made the win calls and committed to them. Still not as good as you, but good enough to pass. Good enough is all the standard requires. You earned your tab. That's what matters. They stood together watching the students work through their exercises. Wind howled across the Alaska range, carrying snow that felt like needles against exposed skin. You planning to stay in instruction? Vaughn asked. For a while. Someone has to teach the next generation. Might as well be someone who remembers what it's like to be doubted. Someone who, as the sun set over the Alaska mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed impossible, Bryn stood at the range entrance and placed a small stone cairn. A private memorial. Not for anyone who died, but for everyone who doubted. For Emma Sullivan, who tried and failed, but paved some of the way. For Vanessa Morrison, who laughed but provided fuel. For every whispered bet that she'd quit, every assumption that she wasn't strong enough, every moment of doubt that had been transformed into determination. She touched the sniper tab on her uniform, black and gold, earned through patience, skill, and an absolute refusal to let other people's limitations become her own. In her pocket, her phone buzzed. A text from Uncle James. How's Alaska? She typed back. Cold, beautiful, teaching, making you proud. His response came immediately. You've been making me proud since you were 12 years old. This is just the world catching up. Keep teaching, keep passing it forward. That's how legacies are built. She smiled, put her phone away, walked back to the instructor building where tomorrow's lesson plans waited. The work was never finished. There would always be more students, more people to teach, more doors to hold open for those coming behind, more doubts to overcome, more standards to meet, more targets to hit. But tonight, standing in the Alaska cold with her tab on her chest and students learning the craft she loved, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd proven everything that needed proving, not with words, not with arguments or explanations or justifications. With 10 perfect shots on a November day in Georgia, with 4 weeks of sustained excellence under pressure, with the quiet demonstration that competence has no gender, excellence has no gender, and patience defeats every doubt. Some legacies are loud, announced with fanfare and headlines. Some are silent, passed from teacher to student in moments of trust. The best ones just hit their target. Every single time.